Hello everyone, since this is going to be in English. I'm Anu Koivunen, I'm the assistant editor of Long Play publication, which is again doing some minor cooperation with DocPoint this year. And I'm honored to be hosting this panel discussion today. I think possibly the reason that we are having this discussion is the film The Disappearance of My Mother, of which the main star, Benedetta Barzini, is sitting here with us. Welcome. In Beniamino Barrese's film, he tries to follow his mother, who ardently tries to escape the camera and talks about being viewed as a woman and about the concept and cruelty of beauty and how it divides women into two camps and so on. We will get more into that later. We have also researcher of cinema and media, Professor Anu Koivunen. And documentary filmmaker Inka Achté. Welcome. So I'm hoping that all of us will, bring our views to this topic based on kind of like our work and our own position of looking at it. First, I would like to look at the film a little bit, talk about that and its themes, but I hope that by the end of this conversation we will have a blueprint for a feminist revolution in cinema. I identified with what you were describing as your feelings and experiences, and I felt consoled by hearing what you were saying, but at the same time I felt complicit, like an intruder as a viewer. How do you see it?
I also feel an intruder myself when I see the film. I felt very embarrassed to have to speak out and to appear, because since many years I have longed for silence and action and not words. And the fact that I dislike images, especially being me the subject of an image, is something that comes from having been a model. Okay, so the first part of your life, when you're young, quote unquote, you have a lot of experiences, you accumulate experiences, and as you get older, you start decodificating these experiences and giving a sense to what you've done and using your experiences as the base of your thinking. So, for instance, fashion and modeling have become a very important way of understanding women's condition. Men shoot you, you're going to a shooting, and you're being shot at by a guy with a thing like this in his hands. And you're supposed to look like the way men want you to be, glamorous and beautiful. And I started thinking about this position in which you're being shot at, where you're a prey and the man is the hunter. And it helped me a lot thinking about women's condition. I ended up by working with the women in industries about health at work, and that was my university, talking to women, listening to what women had to say about their condition. And so from modeling, I took out elements. One of the silliest things that I used to tell my students is, ceremonial clothes are very uncomfortable. And it's been that way since thousands and thousands of years. It's always been uncomfortable to wear important clothes. Why do men have one outfit and women 100,000? Figure it out. I'm not giving you any answers.
What about Anu? What do you take away from that film as the foremost thing?
I think you started by addressing the most important thing, which is the ambiguity. And I think the most remarkable thing about this film is that it's so persistent. So it's not just a moment, like we've had, there's been, well, many occasions for myself and many others as viewers to feel as intruders momentarily, and there might be sort of a intruder in the sense of invading somebody's privacy. But what I think is so interesting about this documentary, that here it is about the conceptual thing about seeing and watching. So it's not just like with, you know, Hitchcock classics, that it's really the Hitchcockian gaze and that you feel that there is a violence in it. But here it's about also conceptually, like every shot and throughout the film. And I think that this ambiguity, it's not solved, so we are left with it. The film doesn't give us any absolution, so we are not pardoned. Like it's until the very end, we watch you hating the camera maledetta, that it's really a curse, and as a viewer one feels it. So I think this is the most important thing about the film. And I just want to mention the scene towards the end where somehow you feel the history of suffering that, or hating, the history of hating the camera, what you just described, when you exit the apartment in the blue dress, and the history is imposed on you. And it's both a very moving scene, I think, because you can, as a viewer, see the layers of times, today and past times, but also that I'm sort of engaged as a viewer in forcing you to live through something which is utterly painful, and I'm sort of enjoying it, and it's just, you know, you hate it, you said it many times, and I'm there, the camera is there, the apparatus is there, and yes, and there's, as I said, I'm not pardoned. I go out from the cinema or stop watching with that feeling.
How about you, Inka?
Well, the thing is that I'm a filmmaker myself, so I kind of feel for your son a little bit. Not that I don't identify in the film with you or this, the kind of rationally I understand the exhaustion of being looked at and the desire not to be looked at. But I perhaps watched it with a slightly different focus, even though I'm a woman, because I'm a filmmaker, and personally my biggest neurosis is that filming people who don't want to be filmed, or worried that they want to stop, they don't want to be in front of the camera anymore. And I mean, obviously when I watch it, I view it through my own filters and through my own experiences. I sort of saw the film as a desire to connect from your son. And maybe that's the way he connects, I don't know. I saw something like that there. I think maybe because for me a lot of times the act of filming is the desire to connect, to understand something, to feel close to something.
Do you want to add something? I had a moment in the film that was a little bit slightly awkward for me in a way that is more familiar from just the history of cinema, and just as a woman and a feminist watching films, something that I recognized as an unpleasant feeling, and I wasn't sure how I was meant to be feeling when I was watching it. There's a part in the beginning where the director is casting young, pretty women to pose as you. the mother, and I felt like those women were just, any woman will do as long as they're young and pretty, and they as humans, as beings, are sort of forgotten that they are merely faces. And I felt disturbed by it, and I'm still, like, I've been thinking about it for days, so it made an impact on me, but I am not sure where to put it, what to do with it. It has to do with a feeling that is recognizable and recurring in the cinema, where you watch as a woman and you realize that there are characters here who are like me, but they are not portrayed as full human beings, maybe, but rather through the way they look when they resemble something, some idea of what they're supposed to be looking like. What do you think when you look at those young women?
Well, I was thinking, okay, well, I said it before and I'll repeat it. I mean, I think Beniamino wanted to go through a bit of the experience that I had modeling by being a photographer, and turn right, turn left, look at me, look down, look up. But what came to my mind is the difference when there are women photographers that are photographing men, and that creates a certain embarrassment, because men are not used to be models, and they can only be stiff, or read the Financial Times, or walk out of a car, luxury car, dressed properly. It's very difficult for men to be. I mean, I remember a session where I was there to. I don't know why I was there, but I was there. And the photographer woman was telling him, be natural, which is something you can easily say to a woman, don't know if she is natural or not. And he was like this, be natural, relax, and it was very difficult. So there's a very ancient difference. A woman photographing a man is doing something that belongs to women, and the camera belongs to men. So that creates embarrassment. Anyway, that's it.
I was also thinking about those, what that sequence or what that casting, an act of casting, or seeking doubles or triples or whatever for you, what it meant. And as a film scholar and somebody interested in the history of feminist filmmaking, I'm sort of looking at this documentary also in that historical context, and of course refusing to be object of a gaze, whether male gaze or just the cinematic apparatus, was the big move of the 1970s feminist filmmaking when it really hit big time, and that was something that informed my viewing of the whole film, that I felt that history to be part, this film to connect, when you say about connecting. So I thought about this film as a whole, sort of connecting with that historical tradition, and somehow to me it became visible when in this film your anger at the camera and critique of the camera apparatus was contrasted with these casted women who were there to be photographed. So there was this kind of, that was an interesting dynamic that I'm thinking about in the profession of acting, not just in modeling, that the whole point about being an actor is to be seen and to connect and to speak to an audience and to engage in a narrative and wanting to be part of that apparatus. But at the same time, it is obvious now, also in the debates that we've had with Me Too and afterwards, it's so obvious that the gaze is experienced as violent, so that the actors are in many cases experiencing the apparatus as violent to them, while they at the same time want to engage in it. So this was something that, reflecting upon this casting and what that part in this documentary meant, so I started thinking about this larger phenomenon. I don't know if it speaks to your experience as a filmmaker, thinking of the discussions that we've had in the industry.
Well, the thing is, again, I didn't read it like that. I mean, again, because I'm a filmmaker, maybe I read it slightly differently, but I mean, I read it as making it evident that this is that it's a performance, that it's performative, that a woman, I don't know how to explain it, that the role a woman has in front of a camera is essentially performative, such as perhaps your role in front of the camera was in the 60s, and the women that are cast there, it's an illusion. And by showing that casting process in the film, I feel that the director made that fantasy or that artificial nature visible in a way that I found really interesting, and that worked for me.
But I think when I said initially that I thought that this relentlessness of the critique of the camera was something so interesting about this documentary, so I feel that, or in my viewing, the relentless was about you expressing throughout the film this feeling that the camera robs something of you. I also share this performative reading, as it's a kind of contemporary reading that, you know, we live in a culture where we take images of ourselves all the time, and it doesn't matter because I can always pose in a different manner. You know, images are just all over the place, and it's just images, and it doesn't. I can sort of differentiate myself from the images, even if sociologists say that today we make ourselves with images. But you talk about something else. You talk about a feeling that it actually robs something of you, so it becomes a question of materiality, and that's the difference. I think that this documentary, or you in the documentary, speaks in a different register.
I wanted to say, Ben used a sentence that I use at school, but he didn't finish it. And the sentence is, each woman is unique, each person is unique and has their own beauty. And in that way, unfortunately, women think that they should look like what today is being sold to the public. So they do their best to look like they should look today, should, quote, unquote. Another thing about what you were talking about is that acting needs to become a profession, to learn, to talk. Models are mute, and they don't have any schooling of any sort, any training, no training. It's, oh, you're so pretty, can I shoot a picture? And then on it goes, magazine calls you to do a story. So models are absolutely out of any form of acting in terms of consciousness. They have no qualities, they have no training, and all they have to do is do what the photographer likes them to do. Please, to please. And also the work of the editors. They used to scream, because Americans are really awful. Anyway, it's really fabulous, divine, and things like that. And I would say, Barzini, you're not divine. What is divine is the work that they've done on you. The makeup, the hair, the clothes, the photographer, the lighting, that is divine. And that will help the editor in her career if she's successful. And most of the models think that they really are divine, and then they fall into the trap. But it's not acting because you have no training and you don't have a career ahead. It's a momentary occupation where you're used like the lemons or the oranges and thrown out.
Inka, you have been lately shooting men mainly, but as a director, how much do you think about, or how should we think about gender in film? How to avoid the age-old cliches and go further?
Well, I think that in my latest film, the men that I depict are feminist men who are fighting against toxic masculinity, and in the previous two films, they were homeless men who are obviously lacking financial power in society, and in the film before that, there were men who have disappeared. So I don't think that, I think it's maybe the men that I have depicted in my work are not men who I guess have that sort of stereotypical masculine power necessarily, that they're possibly disempowered men, or men who don't seek power in that way. So maybe I've focused in these I don't know if you can call them weaknesses, but this sort of humane aspect of men. So that sounds very cynical, but and again, what I said about wanting to connect, I think it's as a director, as an individual, there's a deep desire in me to sort of see good in men, and I guess that's what I've been trying to reach or show or look for in my films. Is that answering?
Yeah. When we talked about this panel earlier on the phone, you mentioned an experience from childhood, which I recognize very much, the sort of sadness of watching a film that you love, but realizing that you are left out of it, basically, because you're a woman. Or your kind is not represented and you can't recognize yourself. You have to identify with the men in it and try to close your eyes from the women.
I think there's a clear path that I recognize in my own career trajectory from a viewer to a filmmaker. And there's a very strong memory of what I used to love Indiana Jones films. And it's strange because I found Indiana Jones very attractive, but I also kind of was him. The viewer is invited to identify with Indiana Jones, this adventurer guy. But there was a point when I realized that the whole sort of magic around those Indiana Jones films collapsed for me. I think I must have been 11 or 12 when I realized that all the women in Indiana Jones films, particularly the one that I loved the most, Temple of Doom, is absolutely ridiculous, very unintelligent, very annoying, kind of, my dress is dirty, and it just didn't at all connect with the women I knew in my life, such as my mum, who's there, who's strong as hell and amazing. And I'm like, what is this? And this is really, and at the same time we have these comedy shows with called Women's Logic, naisen logiikka, in which the woman is completely stupid and ridiculous, and the whole butt of the joke that she doesn't get anything. And there was this horrible sadness in me. The first sadness is, at 11 or 12, that women are somehow just not as cool and great as men. They're a little bit ridiculous and a bit thick. And this must be the reality, because I see it everywhere. The second sadness hit me maybe 10 years later, when I was in my late teens, and I realized, but this is not true. So why? But it must be that these men who make these movies see women in that way, and that made me incredibly sad, because, I had a lot of nice men in my life, and I'm a heterosexual woman. I seek to have contact with men, and it made me incredibly sad. Is this how they see us? Like, completely unnecessary and ridiculous. And I think that sadness really sort of, in a strange way, led me to this wanting to make films, wanting to see the good in men in a way, and wanting to show the men that can be vulnerable, can do good, can, you know.
Brava.
Bravo.
Some maybe 50 years ago or so, film studies professor Laura Mulvey coined this term male gaze in the cinema, and which I am a firm believer in. Or well, you recognize it when you see it, when you watch films. And I recently called her. We could call it an interview, but it might have been a cry for help as well. And I asked her about that time and then how she sees it now. And she says that basically she wrote that article back then because, well, feminism spoiled films for her. Like she had loved Hollywood and just adored it, and then suddenly there were just too many things you couldn't unsee anymore. You couldn't unsee how stupid and shallow the women were portrayed, and then a whole lot goes away with that. She said that she kind of figured it out by starting to make films, avant-garde films by herself, and then also changing as a viewer. She said that she started not watching films as a whole, but like with videotape, rewinding them, forwarding them, controlling them in all kinds of ways. It sounded interesting, but she said that there is something similar now at this moment. I think after Me Too, the whole discussion about first about the women working in the film industry, but then after that, the way women are depicted in film and visual arts has become this issue that can no longer be pushed aside. And I noticed that I have for many, many years tried to sort of kill the feminist killjoy in me and just be like, don't look there because you want to enjoy film. You don't want to let all of that art go. You love the canon, and then it becomes impossible at some point.
This is the pre-Me Too thing, that you're always the killjoy who doesn't have a sense of humor, who's nagging, complaining about nothing, and you're a bit neurotic and maybe you should go to therapy. And I've done that, and the thing is that it's sort of like a mixed feelings when you've been to that therapy, and then Me Too happens and you realise, I didn't need to go to, it wasn't me that was messed up.
Where do you send the bill?
Yeah, well, who do I send the bill? I mean...
But yeah, what to do with that? I think I called Laura Mulvey because there was a sadness. There was a sadness of losing so much stuff that I'd been sort of hanging on to. And then realizing that now I have these new eyes that are different, slightly different from the previous eyes, and I can't make them go away. They are here now. What to do with this? I think I have some hope also in the women changing as viewers. What can happen next?
I think it's a very slow process, and I think it's important that we need to ask those activists of the 70s who were there and started this revolution, because it's a slow revolution, and it doesn't happen overnight, because it's about cultural conceptions, and those change very slowly. So of course there's a question of what kinds of stories and narratives can have a chance within film industry. So it's a business model thing, and it's an industry structure question, and there are all those who are trained and who have entry to the business and who can have a say. Those things don't happen, change overnight. So it's a long history, and sort of we can think about the moment of Me Too, but I think it's crucial that we sort of see it in a longer historical perspectives, because there have been those activists who in various ways have been doing this kind of work and have survived being killjoys and have taken the contempt and that the kinds of changes that we might have now are built on that work. But I would just like to say something about as a film studies teacher, I know that if there is one thing about feminist film theory that has circulated widely, it's the concept of male gaze, and no other concept has ever been misunderstood so much as this concept, because it's understood as the way real men look, see, perceive. And of course, it's a concept that refers to what kinds of poses films offer for women, how, as you were describing, how women are cast and what kinds of roles there are. So in some sense, I think the sadness, just to comment upon this topic of sadness, I think the sadness that you were talking about, and I can certainly share it, is the sort of feeling sad over the narrowness and thinness of the kinds of ways of framing and being interested in women, and that kind of sort of sadness at that lack of imagination, that disregarding of the potential, and at the same time then realizing that, oh my goodness, this what is called male gaze, this cultural conception, has that cultural power and that hold, and that there is, it's so, we can all, we've been discussing it for many decades now, how horrifying that grip is, and yet it's invested, so much money is invested in it, and so many people think that it's a good thing, this narrowness of stories. So I think that's the sadness I'm connecting with. And of course, this was not the answer to your question, how can we change? But I think that we need to understand this, we need to talk about this sadness and confess that there is this sadness.
I think that has been happening now in the recent years. It's very liberating, I think. I'm just sad all the time.
I have something to say.
Okay.
Good. The first thing is that men in film usually write stories about, tragic stories about women, Thelma and Louise, no? And they love it. And that films are usually made under the point of view of man. So I love you suffering and going back to your husband after having had an affair with somebody fantastic, but the morale is go back home, no, which is typical in American film. And the other aspect of women is the ones that you see, for instance, Superman, and what's the name of the Supergirl? Whatever.
Wonder Woman.
Okay, she's very sexy. And all these people that come from Mars, the men are medieval warriors, and the women are beautiful little princesses. Okay. Other point, male point of view, always. And going back to why all of this and what happened in the 70s, what happened in the 70s and until now, and perhaps still for a long time, is declaring what the problem is, but not solving it. Because we cannot solve it. We can just say, well, today I observe a situation where women are still supposed to be beautiful, and beauty is a product on sale, nothing more. And men are still photographed as Ulysses, especially in the perfume advertisements, beautiful muscles, and they always look a little angry because that makes it better, they think looking. And so what we can say is that deep down inside, it'll take a long time to change things. And we also need to understand what we would be. What is feminine if you take away all the leitmotifs that are being used, the hair, the sexy tits, the beautiful skin, the big eyes. If you take all of that stuff away, what is feminine? And what is masculine if you take the muscles and the power out of the picture? So both genders have a long way to go. And I'm sorry if I say this, but I say it anyway. There's a worldwide movement, save the whales, but there isn't a worldwide movement of men trying to discuss why they have to fight wars and kill other people and torture people, because that's the man's world, and it's happening right over the world today. And until the basic questions are not being faced, we're not going anywhere. Because it's useless talking about genderless when you walk into a toy shop and you realize that either it starts from start or you're not going anywhere. So we shouldn't be angry. We're just observing and trying to denounce facts that are still very, very strong.
But I think what you talked about is really changing, working with the idea of trying to change the optic. So it's not just sort of telling different stories, but that of course the form and the content, then we come to this issue that if in this documentary poses are violence, I dare to say so, like poses are what is experienced as violence, and as you said, sorry? Forced, yes, forced. But poses as, when you say that models are not actors, but the idea is that you have raw material, and then the pose is forced on you, and there the culture speaks, that the norm is imposed in the form of pose. And of course, what you said, that what kinds of films you are doing, so you are, it's a different, you change the frame for looking at, you discard a set of poses by exploring different topics. So
breaking the ice.
Yes, yeah, well, but the content and form, that's of course an interesting issue here.
I wanted to just share a slightly connected thing. I'm at the moment part of a theatre group, a kind of documentary theatre project where we've gathered female filmmakers' experiences of trying to get their stories funded. And the results are frankly shocking. So I have a couple of examples. So one filmmaker, for example, who tried to write a story from where the protagonist was a 15-year-old girl, was told by the funder that who the fuck gives a shit what a 15-year-old girl thinks about? Nobody. Didn't get funding. Another person wanted to make a film with a protagonist, a woman who's over 60 years old. The constant feedback was that this is a very small story, it's not going to interest a wide audience, the main character is boring. Nobody's going to want to watch this. Then fast forward a few years, working on the script, and eventually the feedback quite recently was that unfortunately we are now making a film where the protagonists are over 60, so it's a no. So you know, this genre of women who are over 60 on the screen has been done already. It's a niche, and we've done that. I rest my case.
That brings me to statistics from the United States. At some point after Me Too, when all women went nuts and became completely unreasonable and started being angry about stuff, I read all these research papers and statistics about film and women, and I have been one of those people who would say stuff like, well, you don't make a film with your gender, it's the artist's vision and so on, and that really it's you can't say that a woman would make a better film for women and so on. But then the numbers are terrible. Basically, well, in all films, if you look at Hollywood films, there's these databases of thousands and thousands of films, white men speak maybe 80% of the time in these films. When they get older, they get more speech time, and when women get over 30, their speech time collapses and then disappears altogether. They just vanish and they're not there anymore. The interesting thing was then when you start looking at how many women are in the scriptwriting group or whether the director is a woman. If you add like one woman to the team, the percentage of films that pass the Bechdel test, which basically means that in the film you have two women who talk about something else than a man for like maybe a minute, it rises. So you have one woman writing there, it rises. You have more women, more women. And then in the end, when you have something like all of them are women, then you end up with a situation where basically men and women get the same speech time in the film. So it's not even, you know, if you gave every power in film to women, it seems like then you would have some kind of 50-50 situation of people being represented in the world. But at the moment, and this is a great sadness and actually kind of a shock has been to me, but it seems that if men are directing and writing the films, women will not be portrayed as human beings. Am I wrong? Please tell me I'm wrong.
This is exactly the sadness that I was talking about.
It's really shocking. Yeah. How can it be? It's 2020.
Easy. It is. It's never been any different. The point is, we don't know a world where women exist. I mean, I'm saying it as large, you know. We only know a world, what you study in history, for instance, battles, wars, kings, dominion, that's it. So we don't know.
The films you watch. What? And the films you watch, which perpetuate.
Right. And we don't know a world where women exist in terms of acknowledging a difference and not being the same. Okay? That is a fundamental point. Acknowledging the difference, having another trend of thought, and bringing that to complete, you know, the formula. Today we study what philosophers, men, Heidegger said, wrote, and so we still don't have a thought, a philosophical thought. We don't have enough strength to exist in terms of our difference. We haven't identified our difference, and all of this will take time, but it's great. Each one of us puts a little grain of sand and it'll become a beautiful beach. Okay.
I was thinking of these grains of sand being like sort of breaking the system. Yes. We can also use them for that.
But it is really it is horrible to realize that this goes for so many genres. Like we regularly get these little social media scandals when somebody goes to the bookshop and looks at the bestsellers or the biographies published by Finnish publishers, given that women are the cultural consumers and women have a lot of buying power in the field of culture, and yet the big titles that sell a lot or biographies written are by men, about men, and that seems to not have been affected by gender equality development or the level of education of women or women's entry into main professions like key sort of classic historic status professions. Proportion of women in education at the moment, more women than men at the universities in many programs, and it just sort of the power imbalance seems to repeat itself. And of course the dream has been for a long time in film industry as well that new technologies will solve this. That has been the narrative that well, Hollywood is impossible. Hollywood won't change, but you know, mobile technologies, or you know, first it was television, video, those sort of minor technologies give more opportunities for women, and women gain experience, and then it's just a sort of question of, you know, being patient, eventually So it's this eventually that it's a kind of eschatological perspective that, you know, at some point. And I think that, you know, you ask impossible questions or say that you have to change everything, but there is a truth in that, that as long as the norm of human being is coded male, so it is in some sense in the industry for the funding stories that you tell. So the idea is that who is interested in this subspecies of human when you can have the human?
The actual human.
The actual human. And that is in some, you know, that's really tragic.
Do you please give us hope? Is there anything happening at this? I know that there's been so much talk in the movie industry, both here and internationally, about women's position. Is there something happening now that we should be hopeful of?
Well, I think it is gradually changing. I mean, in Finland, certainly we've had big feature films that have attracted a lot of audience, even with women over 60 recently. I mean, as protagonists. But I think that the important thing is that it's not time on its own. We have to very actively watch that, because when there's progress, there's also backlash. And I think to make active, do active actions to make sure that more films by women should see the big screen. So, I mean, for example, personally, I'm really in favor of quotas, the 50-50 quota for film funding, for example. So there needs to be active measures. I don't trust that it's going to go by itself.
In Sweden, they have quotas, and now there is a big crisis because the Swedish film attracts less audience, and of course the backlash is that it's because of this very progressive film policy. So these these marginal stories that have non-white men or women and are not to the main taste, the traditional taste, that the whole film industry or film business in Sweden is in crisis. So there's that's the current narrative there, that quotas will destroy the industry. So I'm sure that will be used as an argument in Finland as well, in this ambivalent situation, and I agree that we need to be very alert.
What should our reaction to the backlash be? Let's make it up now before it comes.
Smile and pat them on the back, on the head.
I think we need to ask you how to deal with backlash.
What is backlash?
Like first you have a wave of feminism and some movement where women are getting ahead, and then it's like go back. Yeah.
And it's gone too far.
Okay, number one, I've never seen a right revolution. Revolutions are always extreme and bring into the picture many defects, terrible defects, any revolution or revolution. And so the women's movement is not a revolution, it's an evolution, and it'll take its time. And even if we don't know it, there's a little red thread that unites a lot of people that don't know and each other, and each one of us will have to do their job. And sooner or later, but we need to get out of stereotype images of women. And it's very, very difficult. I tried in this film to be authentic, to not comb my hair, forget about makeup because that's out, and still not try to dress a little better, to look a little better, which is something difficult, even if. So we have to work on looking at ourselves in the mirror, trying to see ourselves, and not the way other people see us, or we want to be seen by other people by that. We can do very little things like that, and slowly we will come to our point of view, to our strengths, to our trend of thought, and to another way to formulate power, for instance. For as long as we have to wear a man's suit to become a CEO, it's very clear that you have to enter a man's world and fit in it. and become Catherine of Russia. So it takes a long time, and we have to be patient, but each one of us can do things. You know, it's easy to talk about what we can't do, but it's difficult to talk about what we can do. And that's made of having a relationship with a man where what we think is not inferior to what he thinks, or being friends and being complices and trying to depict the problems of oh, you're a woman, you know, what do you shut up, why should you talk, I'm important. Get rid of this kind of superiority that still exists. I come from a Latin country, and I think it's in a way worse. And it's a long way to go, but each one of us can do their little thing. You make film. Go ahead.
I also think that I think there's some little hope, because, for example, when I was 20, I remember being in social situations, and maybe some men would make comments that I found hurtful, that were misogynistic comments, and it was very common for the other men in the company to laugh. I don't know, maybe they were nervous, maybe they didn't know how to react. But I feel that that's changing. Either I'm spending time with nicer men or something has changed. But particularly, let's say my brother's generation is 11 years younger than me. You know, they don't listen to it. I mean, if somebody makes an unpleasant, misogynistic comment, they're like, oof, that's embarrassing, uncool. They leave the situation. They don't laugh. And I feel that really gives me a lot of hope and makes me feel happy.
So let's hope the film funders also realize that there might be some change of their perception of what audiences want, but they also need courage, because of course they say that it's that they have numbers from Netflix or wherever that what viewers want. So it's also a question of how to change patterns of consumption and how cultural sort of how we can I'm not going to say that it's about marketing, but it's somehow a slow process of changing tastes, because I think it's a question of tastes, and tastes have a lot to do with routine, because it's only a very small part of our cultural consumption that we choose actively, very carefully. A lot of it is just, you know, what the algorithm gives us next when we use the services that we use. So it's very actually predictable, and I think that it's really the algorithms, the taste building algorithms that we need to tweak with horrible power. But it's not a horrible power, because it's actually doable. Like,
no, I mean, for myself,
yeah.
I recognize that when, you know, clicking on newspaper headlines or watching some stupid show, because I'm like, oh god, now they get an idea that they should be making more of this, and I'm responsible for it.
I know it sounds a bit, perhaps it's a pessimistic perspective, but I think that is really very important, because if we get more of the same, then it's very hard to interfere with the business logic. And I think that different services should also offer us alternatives or versions of better me, or, you know, more interesting me.
It's really unfortunate, but 1 hour has passed quicker than I ever imagined. As the last word, about this possibility of things changing and different voices being heard, I think a very concrete example of it is that here in DocPoint this year, over half of the foreign films shown are directed by women, and this is more women directors than ever before in DocPoint. And I don't think that this happened accidentally. Happy you want to say?
Yes,
this very quickly because I know that Benedetta wants to catch a film. So I'm Kati from DocPoint, and thank you so much, Anu Silverberg, for hosting this discussion from Long Play, journalist from Long Play, Inka Achté, filmmaker, feminist, Anu Koivunen, researcher, media researcher, and the wonderful Benedetta Barzini, academic and feminist. We are so happy to have you here, and I think all of us, got our minds rolling and working and so forth. And it's not only, yes, we have 51% of the foreign films are 51% of them are made by women. I would say that we also, because in documentary film you also have films made by men about women without the traditional male gaze. Maybe I think many of such films are available here. So think about these issues when you go and watch movies here as well. And also I think it's very important that, let's offer films made by women a platform, but as an audience, let's also watch them. Let's make sure that they get the audience, they get talked about, they get media attention, and so forth. And then Beniamino Barrese, who made this fabulous film about her mother and about all these themes that are in the film, he would like to say a few words.
I'm sorry to interrupt the email.
Welcome. Anybody? Whoever.
No, I just wanted to say that, because it's maybe for a long time women have been talking to women, but it's very good that women talk to men talk to women. And many times when I was trying to look for money for this film, and I was trying to engage, and the Me Too movement wasn't there, and I was trying to engage about these topics. Women were disturbed, and still they are, when they say, "Oh, but you want to talk about this? Why would you? Why would we women want to hear another man talking about us?" I was like, "Oh my God! So what the fuck are we gonna do? It's just like a vicious circle." And then I wanted to say that this discussion is important. That there are some men here, not just women, and that also men talk between themselves about what it. Because ultimately, what I like about this story is that, yes, it's a question of women having to fit into a male gaze, into a male world, but it's also men that have to fit into that. It's gay people, whatever this gay label means. This is just like, how do you relate to the expectations, to the standards, and this is for everybody. So it's a kind of like critical outlook that you have to develop about who you are, and it's very universal. That's why I feel like my mom. I'm a man, but I feel just like her, struggling with who am I, who am I supposed to be, who am I actually, and so I think it's very important to think about it more transversal, not just like. And also when it comes to film, yes, it is an objectification. Just you are building an object, and this object is static. There's a line in the movie where my mom says, "I don't like images because they freeze something into a limited boundary," and this boundary is created by power. It's a power view that is imposed on a topic. But again, it's not just about women. Every documentary has this power struggle between who tells the story, who is portrayed, and so I think there is a different way to go. On the one extreme, there is the image of fashion, which is like, it's built by power in order to create a specific standard, which serves the purpose of marketing. And then there is a more critical image, and I think that's an answer for me as a filmmaker. If you think about your voice and if you engage with your subject, and in this specific instance, this relationship is built on the screen, so you can see this struggle. But you don't have to show it, but you can, when you make a film, you can have this critical perspective and engage with your subject and with your story, and then it will be a different kind of image. So that's my perspective. Thank you. And the casting scene was very much a process of showing exactly this. So.
Thank you, Benedetta, Anu, and Inka. Have a nice festival.